Welcome to the Fantasy NASCAR Podcast. I am Race for the Prize. Let's get ready for Martinsville by looking at who is good at Martinsville. Before we do that, remember, racefortheprize.com. That's where you can go to get access to the Fantasy NASCAR Spreadsheet. $30 for the month of April. All the stats and data that you need, all the practice data that you need to help you build better lineups, all the trends. Let's look at some of the trends. Let's look at the statistics for Martinsville. So, quick refresher in this podcast to remind you who runs well at Martinsville. So we can see on the left, we're taking the driver rating and we're ranking it as opposed to the 150, 123, or whatever score NASCAR gives them. If you have the highest score, then you were number one. If you had the second highest score, then you are number two. And driver rating gives us a good idea of speed, average running position, lap slide, etc. So it's pretty good. Maybe a souped up version of average running position, better than finishing position, which often can be skewed by good things happening at the end or bad things happening at the end. And then over here we have their DFS scores. So last fall, Chase Elliott scored the fourth most fantasy points. Ryan Blaney scored the most fantasy points. And we can average that out and see who tends to score the most fantasy points, who tends to have the best driver rating. No surprise, at a short track with 400 laps, to see the drivers who are running up front, who finish well, who run well, are also scoring the most fantasy points. Just the way that it's going to be. You maybe throw an intermediate track or a road course or whatever, it's going to be much different. But a track with a lot of laps, thus a lot of points. Those points go to the guys up front. The guys up front are the guys with the highest driver rating. And that means, like always, at the short tracks, just like Richmond last week and Martinsville always, we are going to want to target hogs, dominators, lap leaders, fast lap leaders, whatever you want to call them. They're going to be expensive, which more than likely is going to require some extreme value plays, possibly even a punt. Asterisk there, because as you'll see when I go over the optimal lineups video later this week or even today, punts have not been as common at Martinsville as one would expect. You believe that you need to spend for these hogs, and you do. You need those lap slide. You need those fast laps. You need those monster scores. And to afford them, you got to find some savings. The reality is you look back at the last 8 races, you're not going to see a bunch of just punt prayers. Anyway, going over the top drivers. Chase Elliott, not a surprise. This has always been one of his good tracks. It's always been one of Hendrick's good tracks. It doesn't matter who you put in a Hendrick car, they're winning at Martinsville. Bowman, Byron, Larson, Elliott all have wins. Gordon, Earnhardt, Johnson, not just some wins, a bunch of wins. This is their track. Ryan Blaney has been very strong, and even if you run this out further, it's even better. The short flat tracks have been a strength for Blaney. We could see him take that step forward this week. He's been right there at Phoenix, not quite there at Richmond, not really one of his best tracks. But now we go back to maybe his best track. And statistically, there he is, right at the top. We don't know how this package is going to play out. It's going to be different than Richmond. It's going to be different than Phoenix. It's Martinsville. It's its own beast. At the end of the day, you probably want to lean on who has had the best success at adjusting every single time. Because every time they come to a track, they've got to adjust their setup and figure it out. They got to know what they're doing. And clearly, if Blaney is the second highest rated driver, they're making the appropriate adjustments. He knows what he needs from the car. He knows what he needs to do. Larson is up there. Used to be one of his worst tracks. Again, we're not pulling some of the deeper data from CGR, but he is going to be in consideration. Not a favorite, but he is scoring a lot of fantasy points now. 5. That's not going to get it done at the price he's going to cost you. We're going to need 1, 2, 3 in terms of hogs. And just to jump ahead to that build, you're going to need 3 lap leader fast lap guys. Maybe it's possible that your third driver in your lineup scores a bunch of fast laps and doesn't lead a bunch. But most likely the scenario is you're going to need 3 lap leaders. The fourth guy can just be top 5 driver, fast laps, maybe some place differential as well. But we have seen as many as 4 lap leaders because we have seen drivers that weren't quite as expensive. Now that fourth guy in your lineup more than likely isn't going to be an expensive driver to make that optimal lineup work. Your fourth hog or dominator could be just someone who was undervalued heading into the week, has good practice, has good track position, and the race plays out pretty well. And it's not the easiest thing to pass the leader at Martinsville. They often just get out there and run away for a while. On the long run, they can get run down. On the long run, they can hit some traffic. But you don't really need that 8K driver to lead a significant portion of the race. If they get a stint out front, then they'll be your fourth driver in, and that leads to a 4 dominator lineup. Logano, very good at this track. Not a surprise. And again, we're seeing him on the fantasy charts. Big week last week, step forward. So similar to the Blaney situation, do they have something for the Toyotas and Hendrick? I would say absolutely yes. Hamlin, pretty much a monster at this track recently. And these are optimal lineup types of performances. Another Virginia track. Hasn't won here, and well, he did get the win. Or no, he hasn't won here in ages. But it doesn't matter. Wins are overrated. We want fast laps and laps led from these drivers. Truex, maybe not the best, but had a interesting day at Martinsville last fall. I believe he had a speeding penalty midway through the race that really hurt his prospects. Otherwise, he was going to have a really good day, possibly win the race. Byron, if he can avoid issues, is a guy that can go out there and run away at the race. Maybe not my favorite Hendrick driver, but he's fine. And I think the same thing's going to be said of Brett Keselowski that we've been saying. Top 10 speed, not quite there in terms of really running away. Bell next, really has improved at this racetrack. Probably the fastest driver in the circuit right now. Everything looks good. All the boxes are checked. Won this race in the fall. We're fine. Maybe Bowman takes a step forward. It's possible. But what we have seen from him so far this season at these more traditional tracks, although this could be a very unconventional race, it is Martinsville, it is a new package, it is a tire that's going to lay down rubber, we could see him vault a little closer to the front of the field. And it is Hendrick's playground, their Ballywick, so maybe we see a little bit more. The interesting thing with Chase Briscoe, you can see as we went from the Gen 6 car to the next gen car with the shifting and the low horsepower, that Chase Briscoe has become a stud at Martinsville. Expecting a bounce back week, hoping that Richmond, like he mentioned, was just an anomaly, a bad week. Bubba Wallace has improved a lot, but that's what happens when you put him in a Toyota. Going down further, I'm not too crazy about any of these guys. Buescher is a guy that could, in the past, when he was cheap, run in the top 20 and then benefit from what plays out at the end. And that's something you'll see in the optimal lineups from our value picks, that our value drivers tend to have top 20 speed. They're not extreme punts. And then for whatever reason, the way the race plays out, they finish 7 or 8 spots better than their average running position. That was typically always the case for Buescher, but he's no longer a value pick. And I haven't seen quite as much growth. And then we also have the fact that you go to the top, it's Toyotas. You go to the top, it's Hendrick. How far forward can he go? If he was back at a value play, he would be fine. Is he an okay driver at this track? Yes, but you're probably going to be overcharged for him this week. Busch, most likely all of his other stats in his past trending in the wrong direction. The car is trending in the wrong direction this year. Not really that encouraged. Pretty solid numbers from Todd Gilliland. And he does have that Martinsville win in the truck series where then he ran his mouth about Kyle Busch and got fired really quickly after that. This is a place where he can be successful. He has about top 20 speed this year. Pretty good result at Richmond. I know he started up front and then faded back, but no one expected Todd Gilliland to run in the top 10 all day. For him to run around the top 20 is fine. We'll see how the play works out in the end. Ty Gibbs, a couple weeks ago, he was, maybe the best JGR driver. Now he's back to being number 4. I'm fine with that. He has won at Martinsville in the Xfinity Series. But can he win a 400-lap race against the likes of Hamlin, Truex, Larson, Elliott? I don't expect that to happen. Can he run top 5? Maybe scrape some fast points? Yes. And that'll work at an 8K range. It's not going to work at a 10K range. Reddick's never been able to figure this out. Just hasn't happened. And I don't expect it to click here. Dillon's had some pretty good runs and some bad runs. He's liked his car for the most part this season. If he is a value play on the board, we'll consider it. Here again, we've got another SHR forward, Ryan Preece. Fool me once, shame on me. I mean, if we go back to Phoenix, he was good, not great. And I thought there was room for improvement, then he might be a sneaky play at Richmond. Didn't work at Richmond. And we're going to Martinsville. He had a really strong run here a couple seasons ago, gets a penalty, and then falls back in his traffic, still ends up with a pretty good race. If we can get Preece at value, just like Dillon at value, he's definitely going to be in play. Cindric seems to be dead to me. Here we go again with Eric Jones. Not the greatest at this track in the past. Wasn't the greatest at Richmond in the past. But his Legacy Motor Club Toyota seems to have a little bit of speed. And if we can get him under 7K, which I don't think we will this week, does he fit that mold of can he run in the top 20? Yes. Can he get you 5 or 6 place differential points or finish a little bit better because of the circumstances of the race? It usually happens to one of these drivers. And if you're banking on that for a Dillon or a Preece, then why not Jones? Especially if people are going to undervalue him because he hasn't really been that great at this racetrack. We know the car's looking pretty good. I believe Dave Ellens has set up some pretty fast Xfinity cars at Martinsville in the past. We'll see how it works out. Stenhouse is always Stenhouse. Suarez is always the same story. You want to put McDowell as a little weaker of a Jones type of play where, yeah, he can probably hang on to the lead lap, maybe take advantage. And if we look and see 18th most fantasy points, probably not the best day. But you go back here, those work, but that's pretty ancient times. But it is just to show that McDowell in 20th spring, 30th, but then ends up scoring the 11th most fantasy points. Just kind of hang on lead lap, get you some place differential, really cheap, making it work. All right, that's a pretty good review of those drivers. One last thing that we'll probably hit on here is look at last year's practice results. I haven't gone too deep into this yet. Laps from Martinsville 1. No, I don't want to look at the laps. I want to look at last race, we'll look at the practice, look at the groups. So if we look at finishing position for Martinsville last year, and I've mentioned this in the previous podcast, I don't know if I talked about it yet again today. I talk about these same things over and over and over. We have a new package with a new tire. And even with old tires, by splitting an A session and a B session, the B session is going to drive on a track that has more rubber, may not be as sporty. Thus, we see Group B drivers last season who did not lay down extremely fast times. And people see this number and they compare B to A, but you're not comparing apples to apples, you're comparing apples to oranges. And so he is not really the 20th car on a 5-lap run. The data is skewed. You have to separate B and A, which I do in the Fantasy NASCAR spreadsheet, which you can get at racefortheprize.com, and you can find out where they really possibly could be. Another point is that by practicing during this session, you get a better idea of what the race setup might look like, as opposed to a completely green track. When you go out in Group A, the data you collect may make sense for the first 10 laps of the race, and then it's pretty much out the window because the track will have rubber on it. It'll be rubbered up. And so whatever you learned in your small 20-minute session really didn't help you. Not that being in Group B is going to be the greatest information ever. It is good to have that data. And we are seeing that. Who won the race? Ryan Blaney, Group B. Who finished second? Eric Almirola, also a Hog, Group B. Here's your outlier in Group A, Denny Hamlin, a guy that has tons of experience, knows what to do at Martinsville. This is the last race. You got 500 laps to figure it out. Not really surprising, especially also given that he had a good starting position, starting fourth. So that doesn't really that breaks the trend. No, it doesn't, because then you look at Chase Briscoe. Again, where was the speed in practice? He was in Group B. Qualified well, had track position, big day. Logano, Group B. Kyle Larson, Group B. Christopher Bell, Group B. They're able to collect better data. They're also very good at this racetrack. And when it comes down to these guys we have a handful, maybe 10 drivers that are all pretty good at Martinsville. Just a degree of difference in who is better. Well, that degree of difference becomes a little bit wider when a team is able to collect better data through Group B. And NASCAR doesn't seem like they're going to change these rules anytime soon, and no one really cares, except for us handful of people in fantasy, and I don't really even care. And then to illustrate the data more, look, you can see, even though Austin Cindric ends up with a pretty good day, and Bubba Wallace, we can go to the bottom here and see, oh, wow, Kyle Busch really fast in practice. Group A, that's your first cue. Now, you might say to yourself, he's got that long run speed checkbox. Tyler Reddick's got that long run speed checkbox. And that is definitely something I can lean into. But one of the things that absolutely kills him is you go into that first round of practice and Reddick spins out. Kyle Busch doesn't have a good round because he just isn't able to nail that one lap after the track has changed. Corey LaJoie really illustrates this point. Wow, looks like Spyro's got a lot of speed. It was a Group A session. He goes out after it's rubbered up, and he qualifies 30th. It's everything that you need to know about those situations. Oh, well, Ty Gibbs proves your point wrong. Well, Ty Gibbs got spun like 17 times. He did have long run speed. He was able to qualify up front, but he had so many incidents during the race that's why he didn't finish as well as he could. It's not definitive by any means. You can't just say, I'm jamming in all the Group B drivers. And you can't just say that, well, if an A guy is good in the long run, I'm jamming him in. Because there's other trends that we need to look at Martinsville. It's a short track. It is not easy to pass. If you're buried in the field, you're buried in the field. If you're starting up the front and you may have slightly skewed stats, well, they still have to pass you. They still have to get through a bunch of traffic. So nothing is definitive by any means. It's just another thing to look at as you're evaluating the data to put together your lineups. That's going to do it for this one. We went over who was good, looked at kind of the practice speed, set up the Group A situation. Well, we'll talk about optimals, and because there is a unique thing here with Ryan Blaney starting 11th and getting a bunch of points. I think you may know what it is. It's called missing out on the second round of qualifying just barely. So that 11 spot is always kind of interesting. Same thing with the 12 spot. These guys could very easily be starting on the front row, but just because they missed it by a teeny bit, they end up starting 11th, but they still have a ton of speed. You know, they would be comparable to 3 and 4 here. So that 11 spot, 12 spot, it's always kind of interesting. You can get some hog points, dominate points, fast lap points. We'll talk more about that in the optimal lineups video. Thanks for joining me, guys. I'm blessed to have you around. I love you guys. Trip the light. Fantastic.